From Quito, Ecuador, my name is Carla Gonzalez, and this is From the South, the evening news brief from Telesur English. And we begin this new edition right now. As the wait goes on in Honduras for a clear result from Sunday's general election, opposition supporters have again taken to the streets to defend what they see as their victory. The opposition alliance has denounced fraud in the vote count after the 5-point lead for their candidate, Salvador Nasralla, suddenly disappeared late on Tuesday. The center-left opposition says it would also be producing copies of the voting records that clearly show Nasralla has won.
We are defending the results. Nasralla won, Hernandez didn't.
We need a vote count worthy of the people democracy, must be respected. We live under the rule of law. If the current government doesn't want to give us our political and human rights, we will take it to the streets.
The latest results from the Supreme Electoral Court show Nasralla with a lead of barely 0.5%. With almost 79% of the ballot boxes counted, Salvador Nasralla of the center-left opposition alliance has 42.48%, while President Hernandez has 41.85%. That tiny gap is much smaller than it had been on Tuesday.
What he's waiting for is basically a survival instinct. He knows that if he doesn't stay on as president, he will be extradited out of the country. That's the problem he has. He has accounts, and many international media have reported on that. Obviously, he is respected for being president. As president, he has immunity.
The U.S. State Department has called on electoral authorities in Honduras to publish the results as soon as possible. On Twitter, it posted this statement by the spokesperson, Heather Nauert.
The people of Honduras exercise their democratic rights by taking part in elections on Sunday, November the 26th. The United States looks forward to working with the democratically elected leaders of Honduras. We await the final tabulation of results by election authorities and urge the authorities to complete their work without undue delay. The United States urges calm and patience as the results are tabulated. It's critical that Honduran election authorities be able to work in a free and transparent manner without interference. We urge all candidates to respect the results once those results are announced. The United States commends the
El Salvador's ruling party, the FMLN, has congratulated the Honduran people on their democratic victory in Sunday's election. In a communiqué published on Twitter, the party calls on the electoral authority in Honduras to respect the will of the people as expressed on the ballot box. They went on, "We feel the triumph of the Honduran people as our own." Our correspondent Heather Gies is at the headquarters of the Libre Party, the biggest member of the opposition alliance, and joins us now on the phone. Hello, Heather. Can you hear me, Heather?
Yes, I can, Carla.
Yes. So what is the latest from the opposition alliance? What is going on right now in Honduras?
Well, as you know, it's been a waiting game these last couple of days as we wait for final official results from the Supreme Electoral Tribunal. Yesterday, we saw an unusual change in the results after Salvador Nasralla had initially been shown to have a 5% lead over over the presidential candidate, National Party candidate, Juan Orlando Hernandez. That greatly diminished yesterday. And today we've seen that trend of a diminishing gap between the two candidates continue. Now, in the most recent results, it's gone down to just 0.62 of a percentage point between the two candidates, with about 78% of the ballots counted. So it continues to diminish, which is very unusual because previously we had heard that this was an irreversible trend. The 8% margin of victory for Salvador Nasralla was an irreversible trend. So this has been very unusual. What we're hearing is that the departments of Olancho, which is the largest department in the country, Cortez and Coban, all three of which are strongholds for the opposition alliance, have not yet been taken into account in these results. So that's why the trend appears to be going in a different direction, because these results being reported are results that favor the National Party. Right now, just in a few minutes, we're expecting to hear from Salvador Nasralla. He's giving a press conference here at the Opposition Alliance headquarters. And during this press conference, the opposition is expected to present their total count of all the tally sheets, because all the political parties have a copy of the tally sheets. So with that, we should be able to see where we can expect the trend of the election to results to get back to once we have more results coming out of the Supreme Electoral Tribunal.
Thank you very much, Heather, for your report from Honduras. We now go to Venezuela, where the state-owned oil company PDVSA is undergoing huge changes. Around 50 managers have been detained since August as part of a massive anti-corruption investigation, and a new leader has been sworn in. Frederick Gillingham shares more information about this from Venezuela.
Stamping out corruption within Venezuela's state-owned oil company PDVSA will be a top priority for its newly appointed leader, General Manuel Quevedo. For his inauguration, Quevedo was joined by President Nicolás Maduro, along with the company's workers, who had come from all over the country. In a packed-out hall at the La Capina headquarters in Caracas, Maduro announced that a highly lucrative criminal mafia had infiltrated the company.
We have made investigations through the intelligence services, and they have discovered a disaster. Oil has been stolen directly. International boats have come and been filled illicitly with crude oil products to benefit their people's personal accounts. These are true mafias, with branches everywhere, overcharging everything.
Traían barcos internacionales y los llenaban de crudo o de productos.
The need for the company to make a fresh start has been called for, not just by the president, but also by the workers. Although a jubilant atmosphere was on show here, below the surface concerns were being raised about the company and its need for a new direction.
Definitely, we need to transform PDVSA, because as we know, PDVSA came from transnational hands. We know that after the history of 100 years of oil exploitation, the old PDVSA still exists. There are still managers and methods and procedures from the old PDVSA.
All eyes will be on Quevedo in the coming weeks and months. Tackling corruption and clearing out the company's ranks aren't the only things he needs to deal with. Sanctions loom over the company, and with oil production at an all-time low, he needs to be swift in how he takes on the responsibility of leading Venezuela's most important industry.
Venezuela's Vice President, Tarek El Aissami, has announced that Nicolás Maduro will run for president in 2018, looking for a second consecutive term in office. Speaking at a United Socialist Party rally, the Vice President said that Maduro's candidacy will come on top of the victories achieved by the Bolivarian government. The announcement comes just 2 days before a dialogue restarts between the Venezuelan government and the opposition in the Dominican Republic. That dialogue in Santo Domingo will center, among other things, on the economic blockade imposed on Venezuela and the defense of political rights. Elias Hawa, the government's representative at the talks, said that the meetings will defend, above all, Venezuela's right to sovereignty. Our correspondent Frederick Gillingham has more from Caracas.
So December's dialogue between the opposition and the Venezuelan government is scheduled to be taking place this week. The 1st and 2nd of December, Friday and Saturday, are the set dates. The talks are set to be taking place in Santo Domingo, the capital of the Dominican Republic. The foreign minister of the Dominican Republic has announced that the president, Danilo Medina, will be present to mediate the talks. He will also be joined by various representatives from academic, education and human rights sectors. The foreign ministers from the following countries: Paraguay, Nicaragua, Bolivia, Mexico and Chile will also be present. The opposition leader, Julio Borges, has announced that 20 opposition representatives are scheduled to be at those talks on Friday and Saturday. However, the Venezuelan Foreign Ministry is expressing concerns that these representatives might not even turn up. Let's remember that back in September, opposition representatives walked out of dialogue talks in Santo Domingo on grounds that over concerns regarding October's regional state elections. So obviously a lot has to do with whether these opposition figures will turn up on Friday. The frailty of that opposition bloc and the unpredictability we'll just have to wait and see until Friday. From me in Caracas, that's all we have time for. Back to you in the studio.
That was Frederick Gillingham from Caracas. St. Lucia's Prime Minister Alan Chastanet has called in the IMF to reclassify funds borrowed by Caribbean countries that were devastated by Hurricanes Irma and Maria. According to Chastanet, these countries need concessions to rebuild their economies and said that there's also a need for a dedicated fund which the Caribbean could draw from without the typical bureaucratic processes. The government of Dominica has signed 2 agreements with China on economic cooperation. China will provide over $18.5 million that will benefit Dominica in agriculture and other areas that the Dominican government sees fit. Prime Minister Skerrit spoke on how China has been an ally in aiding the island's recovery from Hurricane Maria.
China immediately dispatched supplies of food and other essentials to us. They also were the first in the international community to make a contribution to the appeal by the United Nations Development Program of $8 million US, which is equivalent of about $3 million US, the equivalent of 8 million EC dollars. That will go towards the re-roofing and rehabilitation of several homes across Dominica.
U.S. congressmen and senators are proposing an ambitious project of reconstruction for Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands.
For his kind remarks. This bill is comprehensive.
Let's rebuild Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands better than they were before the hurricanes. With that phrase, these Democrat legislators, led by Senator Bernie Sanders, presented a project law of $146 million for the recuperation of these U.S. territories.
To tell the people of Puerto Rico and tell the people of the Virgin Islands that they are not forgotten, they are not alone, and that we intend to do everything possible to rebuild those beautiful islands.
This law project includes the reconstruction of the electricity network of Puerto Rico, with 70% of its energy provided by renewable sources. Also contemplates resources for health and education.
The message that we are sending to President Donald Trump, along with the Republicans in the Chamber of Representatives and the Senate, that what they've done in relation to Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands is insufficient. The lives are about to be lost because of their lack of action.
2 months after Hurricane Maria, in the named island of Enchantment, still 72% of homes lacks electricity, and other important numbers are still unknown, according to this expert.
We don't know how many people died. We think there was maybe 900. Official numbers say 55, but it really hasn't been investigated. There's unrest, there's destruction. The economy is totally paralyzed. The government indicators are very low. There's not even money to circulate in our economy or for this one to work.
At the end of their presentation, Senator Bernie Sanders said that it's incredible that the wealthiest country in the world could abandon their people like this. The legislators that presented the project are aware that it's practically impossible for it to be approved. But they see it as a tool to start debating and to negotiate a better package of measures for Puerto Rico that surpasses the ridiculous $29 billion that Donald Trump asked the Congress, not only for the reconstruction of Puerto Rico, but also for the Virgin Islands, Florida, and Texas.
More news in a minute. Stay with us. Argentina's two main trade union confederations, along with other social movements, have held a mass protest against the government's labor reforms. Thousands gather outside the Congress in Buenos Aires to try to block the plans by President Mauricio Macri to roll back their rights. The central slogan of the protest was, "Enough, this is not a reform, it's a cut." One of the organizers said that this was the beginning of the end for Macri. And 54 members of Argentina's military dictatorship that ruled the country for 7 years were sentenced to life in prison, accused of crimes against humanity, including the torture and killing of 5,000 people at the Navy Mechanics School. Thousands of people and several social organizations like the Mothers of Plaza de Mayo gather outside the tribunal waiting for a sentence after 5 years of trial. The so-called mega trial has become the biggest one in the history of Argentina. Before the verdict came through, our correspondent Edgardo Esteban sent this report on the background of the ESMA trial.
There is no doubt that today is a historic day for Argentina. We're living under a government that constantly questions and stigmatizes human rights institutions. But it is in this context that the 55th District Court is going to pass sentence in the mega case of the Argentinian Army's mechanics school, the ESMA. This is the third trial in this case, which is the most horrific case of repression and torture known in the recent history of the country, where 5,000 citizens were kidnapped, tortured and murdered. Another extremely important thing is that for the first time the so-called death flights are being judged. This refers to a practice in which many of those kidnapped people were drugged, then put on a plane and thrown into the sea or a river to cover up any possible evidence. But some of those bodies were found in the sea, and that led to confessions by some witnesses and by some of the officers who took part in the operation. Today, the responsibilities of the military perpetrators should be decided. There are 54 members of the ESMA being judged. It has been a long journey in the search for truth and justice. The human rights organizations have been working hard, and it seems that today their work will show some results, thanks to the testimony of the witnesses who have told of their experiences while they were detained inside the ESMA, a place that is now a historic monument to recall the horrific past and to avoid its repetition. There's a lot of expectation among social organizations like the mothers and grandmothers of the Plaza de Mayo and from other human rights organizations. So we'll be waiting for the verdict and ready to bring you the latest information.
Edgardo Esteban from Argentina. In Bolivia, the Constitutional Court has lifted the limits on re-election, allowing President Evo Morales to stand for a fourth consecutive term in office in 2019. Members of the court have argued that the Constitution restricted the political rights of people by putting a limit on the number of times someone can aspire to run for a government position. President Evo Morales celebrated the new rule that would allow him to run for a fourth term.
A great surprise for the people, for the revolutionaries, for the anti-imperialist people. A ruling that allows us now to obtain the vote for a new term. I want to tell you that this ruling handed down by the Plurinational Constitutional Court on the basis of the Constitution and especially on the basis of international law. On behalf of the Bolivian people, on behalf of the national government, I want to thank so many spontaneous demonstrations for the accessions to the resources of the different social movements.
The president of Ecuador, Lenín Moreno, has issued a decree ordering the country's electoral council to organize a plebiscite, which some members of his own party see as an attempt to roll back the legacy of his predecessor, Rafael Correa. In the last 2 hours, Moreno tweeted, "Because it is the people's right, and because Article 105 gives me the power, I have sent the CNE Executive Decrees 229 and 230, calling a popular consultation. Let's go for a resounding yes." The surprise move came just before Ecuador's Constitutional Court was due to rule on the questions in the plebiscite. In Brazil, over 700 families from the landless workers' movement have been evicted by military police forces from their encampment, Elenira Resende. Those evicted have moved to another area nearby and are demanding their right to use the empty land to continue to grow food. The families have been living there since 2009. They built their houses and planted organic crops to support the community. The Santa Barbara company is claiming ownership of the land but has no proof to back this up and is supported by the local authorities. More families and land workers in the region may face the same fate in the coming weeks.
This is the outcome of the coup in Brazil. The rural segment of Congress feels like they can do whatever they want. They can murder, and the judicial branch lets them do it. Now, from the point of view of that judiciary, there were 700 families evicted, but from MST alone, there can be 1,200 more families evicted.
In the morning, a military police force came with almost 150 men, trying to evict the people with 3 trucks and move them to a distant municipality so they can gather easily, but the family resisted.
People in Mexico are preparing for the 2018 electoral process, and a candidate to note this in this year's race is Mexican indigenous politician María de Jesús Patricio Martínez, known as Marichuy. She has been rallying for signatures at universities at the capital, and our correspondent in Mexico City has more details in this report.
Members of the university held a pre-Hispanic ritual which invoked the 4 elements of nature in preparation for the visit of María de Jesús Patricio Martínez, who is running for the National Indigenous Congress's presidential candidacy. The tour of the spokesperson for the indigenous government through the campus of the National Autonomous University of Mexico began where Leslie Berlin was murdered last May.
We see violence and we look away. Today there is a lot of pain in my heart, but there is also a lot of anger, because nobody deserves this, not us as Leslie's family, nor anybody.
In another part of the university, volunteers from the support network for Marichuy, as she is known by 400 indigenous groups, collected signatures for her candidacy.
As we collect signatures, we connect with the people, so after 2018, we can create an organization that belongs to the people, from below and to the left.
In front of one of Mexico's most emblematic buildings, the National Indigenous Councilors gave details about their proposal.
In this country, territories are being taken away from the people on behalf of international businesses and financial capital.
Stop education from being the main cause of the alienation of our communities, and stop being a part of the capitalist system in the cities.
In order to make their candidacies as independents official for next July's elections, the potential candidates must gather more than 866,000 signatures, which is just 2% of those eligible to vote.
Rice producers in Peru have protested against free trade policies that could affect their business production. More than 600 rice producers and campesino leaders from different regions protested against the decrease of rice prices and said that the elimination of taxes to cereal imports could turn into an unfair competition with products from Asia, the US, and other markets. Dozens of campesino and indigenous families have camped outside the house of President Jimmy Morales in Guatemala's capital. They took action after being driven out of their communities. They demand that President Jimmy Morales' government provide a solution for their housing problem.
Most of these families are part of the Quechua Mayan community and have arrived from Guatemala's northeast in order to settle outside the presidential home, in order to confront the president. They tell us they have no other option after being violently driven out of the lands they inhabited.
We settled ourselves here because we are in dire need and we want our lands back. We want to be given concrete answers. We don't want them to try and fool us, as they have always done.
Dozens of women and children are living inside improvised tents. Some of them are malnourished and are in danger of getting sick due to the cold weather during this time of the year. Mothers say they were violently evicted by security forces.
They have been violent. They even came armed. We don't have any weapons. We're defenseless. They got there, broke all of our things, broke anything that was useful to us. They stole our birds. The police steal whatever little thing we own.
Other communities of campesinos and indigenous people have joined this improvised settlement. They have also been driven out of their lands in the past few weeks, under the pretext that they were occupying private property. Regardless of this, community leaders assert they have lived in those lands for decades. Those lands belong to their ancestors, and they ask to be allowed to be back in their homes.
We want to negotiate as a group. There are cases of reinstatement, of readjustment, and appeals regarding access to the land.
The families allege they will not move their settlement from outside the presidential home until they can meet with the president, Jimmy Morales, and until he assures them that they will be able to return to the lands they claim as their own.
We'll be back very soon. Stay with us. The authorities in Indonesia have stepped up their evacuation efforts in Bali as Mount Agung volcano continues to sweep thick clouds of black ashes. In the last few days, the volcano has begun shooting lava as high as 4 kilometers into the sky. Officials have warned that the volcano could explode into a thunderous eruption at any moment. They are urging villagers living up to 10 kilometers from the volcano to move to emergency centers as fast as possible.
I am a refugee from Kuvu village, which is 12 kilometers from Mount Agung, which has still not erupted, but I am really scared. I have brought all 12 members of my family to this refugee camp.
Taxi drivers in Spain are on a 24-hour strike to protest against app-based car services such as Uber and Cabify, which they say are not following the law. Spanish law allows 30 official taxis for every Uber or Cabify vehicle, and taxi unions say the law is not being enforced properly. Official taxi drivers are losing business based on the app vehicles with higher drivers known as VTCs in Spain.
Simple. I am protesting because I am tired of working lots of hours on the street, of struggling only to see work and the bread of my children being taken away from me. My mother's house is mortgaged. I have my wife's income, but if the taxi doesn't work, everything will collapse.
Now here are some of the other news that are making headlines around the world.
The former Bosnian Croat military commander Slobodan Praljak drank poison inside the International Court in The Hague after learning of the final verdict on his appeal. Praljak was one of the 6 former Bosnian Croat political and military leaders up before the court for crimes in the city of Mostar. Praljak later died in hospital, and the UN has announced the court is now a crime scene. US President Donald Trump has caused more controversy via his tweets. Trump retweeted Jada Fransen, the deputy leader of British far-right group Britain First, whose first tweet was of a video claiming to show a Muslim man attacking a man on crutches. This was followed by 2 others Fransen claimed to be of Muslim men, where one was destroying a statue of the Virgin Mary. British Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn says the government should condemn the tweets. Egyptian President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi has ordered his military command to use all force necessary to secure the Sinai Peninsula, following a militant attack on a mosque that killed more than 300 people.
Allow me to take this opportunity before you all and before the Egyptian people to bind Mohammed Farid Hegazi. It is your responsibility to secure and stabilize Sinai within the next 3 months. You and the Interior Ministry.
More than 150,000 Catholics gathered at a stadium in Yangon to attend Pope Francis's first homily in Myanmar. Pope Francis called on citizens to embrace peace and reconciliation as their country emerges from nearly 5 decades of military rule.
During his 4-day tour of Africa, the French President Emmanuel Macron lost his temper when asked about human trafficking in Libya, which has burgeoned following the NATO military intervention in 2011. Europe is desperate to stem the flow of migrants across the Mediterranean without leaving them to the mercy of traffickers in transit countries like Libya, where they face torture, rape, and, as a CNN report that aired on November 14th said, being sold into slavery. And we end now with a breaking news. The difference in Honduras is now down to 0.14% in Honduras for the key elections that we were following throughout this week. And now we've come to the end of this evening news brief. Please follow us. This and many other news, you can find them on our website at telesurtv.net/English. And join us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. For Telesur English, I'm Carla Gonzalez. Thank you for watching.